This is one, and my wife always says, you say this is your favorite a lot. I mean it. This is one of my favorite events in the Gospels. One that I think is undervalued, underappreciated. We skim past it real quick and we miss the significance, the value, the importance of what took place in Matthew chapter 17. Now, before we get to Matthew chapter 17, let me kind of give you a connection to what has taken place before this. A week prior, Jesus asked his disciples one of the most important questions that can be asked. He asked this question in Matthew 16:15. Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? And honestly, that is one of the most important questions because every believer needs to answer that question. Who is Jesus in my life? Who is Jesus? Not who is Jesus to your parents or your grandparents. God does not want grandchildren. He wants sons and daughters. Every single one of us have to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. And that question is foundational. Who do you say I am? A week after Jesus asked the disciples that question, God answers the question. I mean, think about it. God, the holy, awesome God, is going to reveal to three of Jesus' closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, who Jesus is. And we get a glimpse of this. We get to see the events that have taken place, so we as well can see God's answer to who is Jesus. Let's set the stage by looking at Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. And it starts out by saying, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. Now, we do not know exactly which mountain this was, but it was somewhere in the upper Galilee region, south of Caesarea Philippi. We also know that they were moving towards Jerusalem, because in a short time, Jesus would lay down his life. He would die for us on the cross. That was in a short time ahead. And so Jesus and his disciples are moving towards Jerusalem. Now, when they get up the mountain, Jesus does as he does so many times. He goes by himself to pray. He goes by himself to pray. And as the disciples do so many times, they're not there praying as well. They're not there sharing the events that have been unbelievable, all the miracles that Jesus has done. Does anybody know what they're doing? Sleeping. Sleeping! Here is Jesus knowing what is ahead of him. And these disciples, these three, have been invited with Jesus to this mountain, and they are sleeping. But God is not going to let them miss what is about to happen, because it is so crucial for them to be able to answer that question, who is Jesus? And God is going to reveal that answer in a life-changing way. Peter, James, and John, as it says in Luke 9:32, that they were asleep. Let's go ahead and see Luke's account. Luke 9:32, we see that Peter and his companions had been overcome with sleep. But when they were fully awake, what happened? You can read it right there. They saw his glory. Now, what we're going to see in Matthew 17 is three verifications. Three verifications that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Three verifications, as only God can provide, and again in a way that will change these three disciples' lives, and I hope we see this in a way that changes ours as well. Let's see Matthew's full account of this event, Matthew 17, verses 1 through 8. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from that cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Let's start to break that down. Because again, this can just be a quick blur and be like, wow, that's great. Moving on, let's really see what happened. And again, these elements of verification of who Jesus is. That's the whole thing. Answering the question, who is Jesus? God's going to do it in a way that only God can. And it starts with this. If you have your bulletins, it'll be on the screen. We'll see this first of all. We see the transformation of King Jesus. The transformation. When I grew up, I was a big fan of Transformers. I had those little toys, and they switched, and from a semi into like this robot or whatever. Well, this word transform is going to be much cooler than the Transformers, especially the horrible movies that they made later and didn't do very well. This is going to be the real transformation. Something that is out of this world. The transformation of King Jesus. Matthew 17:2. We read what took place for Peter, James, and John to see the glory of Jesus. When Matthew writes, there he was transfigured before them. Now, the word transfigured in this verse is a pretty cool word. The Greek word for transfigured is metamorpho, where we get the word metamorphosis, right? Metamorpho literally means to change into another form. But let me explain what this means in context of Jesus, all right? In this miraculous event, the transfiguration of Jesus meant that the outward appearance of Jesus was changed so it matched the inward reality. Okay? The outward appearance changed, transformed, transfigured to match the inner reality. In other words, Jesus' divine nature was veiled in human form. When Jesus came as God in the flesh, his divine nature, his deity, was veiled, was covered by his human form. But at the transfiguration, Peter, James, and John saw a glimpse of the true reality of Jesus. So what was that reality of Jesus? What was the glory, the deity that they saw? What was the transfiguration that revealed the true answer to who is Jesus? Matthew 17:2 says, his face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. Okay? That's pretty significant, right? Mark 9:3, Mark's account, says his clothes became shining, exceedingly white like snow, such as no launderer on earth can whiten them. This is whiter than what OxyClean could ever get, right? And for those from the 70s, Kindgom, your ancient Chinese secret, can't touch the glory clothes of Jesus. Because this is whiter than any launderer could ever get white to be. My favorite account is in Luke 9:29. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. This is the glory of Jesus. This is the deity of Jesus. That which was veiled by his human form was now revealed in this metamorpho, this transfiguration. So they saw a glimpse of who Jesus is. And who is Jesus? He is God the Son. Because any time in the Old Testament when God is revealed, God takes on a form, it is a form of light. God is light. And this was a picture into the reality that Jesus is the fullness of God. Jesus was no longer veiled by the flesh of humanity. They saw his deity shining through. I mean, that's awesome, okay? That would be enough for me to just like pass out, and I'd be done. I'd be over, right? It doesn't stop there, because that is the first verification of who Jesus is. That his form he was transformed to reveal the deity, the holiness, the glory that Jesus possesses. The second element of verification of who Jesus is, I'm serious, if this doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. This is so awesome. The testimony of the Old Testament heroes. The testimony of the Old Testament heroes. Let's see this in Matthew 17:3. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So Jesus, first of all, looks like lightning. Okay, a white that cannot be compared in this earth. The glory of God revealed. Then Moses and Elijah appear. Does anyone want to guess how many years it had been since Elijah walked the earth from the time that this took place? Anyone just want to throw out how many years? 7 what? 700. Very good guess. Very close. 900 years. 900 years. No one had seen Elijah, and here Elijah is in the present. Anyone want to guess how many years since Moses had died? 1,400 years. What we are seeing here is not something this world can contain. This is the appearance of Old Testament powerhouses that are present there with Jesus. But I love what Luke reveals in his gospel. He reveals that Moses and Elijah appear in glory. But it's not their glory. They actually reflect Jesus' glory. It is Jesus' glory to which they appear, which means it's very clear Moses and Elijah were clearly lesser than Jesus. This was not, they had their own little glow going on. They had their own little lightning. No, this was Jesus' lightning, Jesus' glory. They were in his glory. They were a validation of who he is. But then, beyond the sense of just seeing something, someone who hasn't been alive for 1,400 years, now they hear something. They hear a conversation that Moses and Elijah have with Jesus. So now, audibly, they are hearing something that's out of this world. And why this is important, some may ask, why Moses? Why Elijah? Why not Abraham? Why not King David? Well, the reason why it was Moses and Elijah is because Moses gave the law of God. Elijah, as a prophet, spoke the words of God. So Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets. In other words, they represent the Old Testament. They represent that the Old Testament is pointing to the reality of this is who it's all been about. We have been pointing to him. They represent the Old Testament, giving this representation, this validation of saying this is whom we spoke of. This is who was prophesied about. This is who it was all pointing to. Right there. Jesus. They were the lesser. Jesus was the greater. And if that is not enough, if lightning of Jesus is not enough, Elijah and Moses seeing them is not enough, what was their conversation? What was their conversation? We see the conversation in Luke 9:30. Luke 9:30 through 31. Behold, two men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory, again, not their glory, but Jesus' glory, were speaking of his departure, which was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So what are they talking about? Well, the Greek word for departure is exodos, which means final outcome. Moses and Elijah were talking to Jesus about the cross, the final outcome. They were talking to Jesus about what the path that he would fulfill as the Christ, the Son of the living God. They were talking about the cross. What in the world? That is unbelievable. Now, I have heard preachers, and preachers don't always get it right, okay? We do our best. We study hard. We seek the Lord. We're led by His Spirit, but we don't always get it right. I've heard preachers, in my opinion, give a wrong interpretation of what took place. I heard preachers say that Moses and Elijah were giving Jesus a pep talk. You can do it, Jesus. Go to the cross. That's not what's happening here. They were not there for Jesus. They were there for Peter, James, and John. Their conversation was not a pep talk for Jesus. It was to reveal the path of the Christ, the Son of the living God, the cross. Because if you remember from last week, the disciples really struggled with Jesus saying that he would die and 3 days later come back to life. They were really struggling with that. We can totally understand that, right? And so what happened here is that the full representation of the Old Testament is pointing to the reality of the cross, God's plan of the cross, and we see that this was for Peter, James, and John to understand and for them to be able to believe the path that Jesus had to take. Now, did they still struggle? Yes. Don't we struggle? Don't we struggle in our faith? Don't we many times build up all the muster to be able to say, I can handle this trial, and then when the trial comes, we're crying in a corner? The reality is we all struggle, but Jesus doesn't change. And we see the struggle that they had in Matthew 16, 21 through 23. When Jesus told them what he was going to do. Let's look at what happened a week prior to this miraculous event on the mountain. Matthew 16, 21 through 23. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Jesus made it very clear what the path was for him to fulfill who he is as the Christ, the Son of the living God. And how did they respond? Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. Again, Moses and Elijah being there was not for Jesus. It was for Peter, James, and John. It was for them to know deep in their heart. It was for them to see clearly. It was for them to be awake, to know that the path is the cross. And the Old Testament has been pointing to that. And there's no question who Jesus is as the Christ, the Son of the living God. And the cross was the way he was going to live that out. This is a tremendous testimony from the Old Testament to indeed say that this is the King of heaven and he is on schedule. It was not a pep talk for Jesus. It was for those men to see and hear and know Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. I hope you're beginning to see how important this is. I think this is unequaled in all the gospel records for a testimony of who Jesus is. And God is providing this answer. who is Jesus. By lightning, by Moses and Elijah, and by saying this is the destination, the cross, the cross. So how did they respond? How did they respond? Well, in Matthew 17:4, we see Peter's response. Peter blurted out, "Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter was so overwhelmed he didn't know what to do. He wanted to somehow capture how awesome this was, and he just blurted out, "We'll make memorials for all of you. This will be great." We actually see in Mark's gospel, it says, Peter did not know what to say. He was so frightened. But Matthew 17:5 records that while Peter was talking, God silenced the nervous talker. And this is what happened. Matthew 17:5, while he, Peter, was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." What's happening here is God is not messing around. Because unknowingly, unintentionally, Peter is putting Jesus and Elijah and Moses on the same level. This was not a different memorial for Jesus than Moses and Elijah. No, 3 memorials. Let's memorialize this. Let's honor all 3 of you. And God is shutting it down and saying, no, Jesus is greater than anyone or anything. And what Jesus is saying comes from what God is saying is a booming affirmation from God. And it's not gentle words that feel like butterfly wings on your ears. This is make you pass out, holy God, on your face. There is no way I want to live another second. That is the validation, the affirmation that God gives to shut down any thought that the 3 of them are on the same level. And so the last thing that we see, the last validation of who Jesus is, comes through the holy fear of a holy God. The holy fear of a holy God. Peter, James, and John, if they weren't frightened before this, they were beyond terror at this point. God confirms who Jesus is with a voice of all authority, with a voice of all judgment, and they respond in the only appropriate way. Matthew 17:6, when the disciples heard God speak and pretty much say, "Shut up and listen to my son," it says that they fell face down to the ground, terrified. Peter, James, and John needed a holy fear of a holy God. That was the only way they would follow Jesus. That was the only way that they would listen to Jesus and see who Jesus is as the Christ, the Son of the living God. To have a holy fear flat on your face. I'll be honest, there are too many times that we walk around and have no fear for God. We have no, as Phil talked about, no reverence for God. We sit back and we're, "Thank you, Jesus, you died for me. Thank you, you came back to life. I'm going to go on my day, and I'll think about you later. Maybe next Sunday, maybe next year, I'll think about you." The only appropriate response to the fullness of Jesus is reverence, a holy fear, flat on your face. And too many times we walk through life and we just put Jesus in some little compartment and we act as if our life is more important than what he has done for us. And I'll be honest, I get it. I do that a lot of times. There's a lot of times things happen and immediately I place fear greater than Jesus. I place my priorities greater than Jesus. I place the problems of this world greater than Jesus. There's only one appropriate response when God reveals who Jesus is, and it is flat on your face reverence to the Son of God, the King of heaven and earth, Jesus Christ. And these disciples had to have a holy fear. if God was going to use them to establish his kingdom, the church, and for them to be able to persevere what they would endure. You see, when trials come, if we don't know who Jesus is, we're out the door. When hardship comes, when disappointment comes, if we do not know and see clearly Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, we will be moved by whatever wave is coming against us. And these disciples needed to see, they needed God to answer the question, who is Jesus? So that no matter what happened from those days ahead, even when they messed up, and they did mess up, they could still resolve and say, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so for us, we have to answer that same question. And the truth is, it's hard. It's hard. But Jesus doesn't change. So our faith shouldn't change. But we have to ask the question, who is Jesus to you when you're alone? Who is Jesus to you when no one's watching? Who is Jesus to you when things go wrong and disappointment sets in? Who is Jesus to you when loved ones leave? Or when loved ones die? Who is Jesus to you when dreams don't come true? Who is Jesus to you when you're tempted and when it's not popular, it's painful to follow Jesus? Who is Jesus when you're persecuted and mistreated? You see, if we don't know, and if we don't believe, and if we aren't secure in who Jesus is, temptations will define us, troubles will change us, and trials will take us away from God. These disciples had to know Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, with complete assurance and surrender, and we do as well. I'd like to close today by looking at what happened to these three terror-struck disciples. I don't want to leave them flat on their face, okay? What happened? And this is so important. I think this is grace. Matthew 17:7, we see that then Jesus came over and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. Get up. Don't be afraid. For some of you here today, you need the assurance from Jesus that you're not alone in fear. He's with you. You need the assurance that you are not left in your sin. You need the assurance you're not left in your failure. And to you, Jesus is saying, it's time to get up and follow me. For others, we need God to give us eyes to see what these three disciples saw after Jesus touched them. After Jesus touched them, Matthew 17:8 reveals that when they looked up, they saw only Jesus. Now, this is speaking in context, the fact that now Moses and Elijah were gone. They only saw Jesus. There was no one else there. But this speaks so much more spiritually to reveal that when Jesus touched them and said, do not be afraid, they looked up and they didn't see fear, they saw Jesus. They looked up and they didn't see their failure, they only saw Jesus. They didn't look up and see the fact that, hey, we're here and the other disciples aren't. We're awesome. No, they only saw Jesus. And for many of us here today, whatever's going on in your life, you need to look up and you need to only see Jesus, because Jesus is all that matters. Jesus is all that matters. No one else compares. I pray we only see Jesus. Nothing else is worth more than him. I pray we only see Jesus. He is always greater. I pray we only see Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. I pray we only see Jesus. He is the Son of God, the Christ, the King of Kings. I pray we only see Jesus.